This is Rob Kilmer. This week, the right and the left have gone crazy on each other again, and the more I have watched it, the more I realize that the reason they do it is the same reason we tolerate it. And I'll tell you what I think that reason is this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. As always, callers to the show will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests will be treated with complete respect. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topics up for the next week's show. You can also visit my blog through the site. You can read my posts and leave your own. The lineup for the Sunday talk shows will also be posted there on Saturdays. You can always listen to my show live on streaming audio, by the way, on www.wnbf.com. And my show is then uploaded to youdefendit.com later on Saturdays, so you can listen to it from there if you missed it live. Okay. This week I want to talk about something, not any specific issue, but something more broad that I think governs a lot of what we do and a lot of what we hear in this country. And it occurred to me this week, actually, at work, when I heard a judge say, this case is hard. This was not a jury type of situation. This is where a judge had to make the ultimate decision. And he candidly said, this is a hard case to decide. And I wouldn't say he was anguished about it, but I thought it was to his credit that he said that. That's a tough one for me to decide. There have been lots, there were good points on either side. He had to choose. And ultimately, like every good judge, he did. He made a decisive decision, a decisive ruling, and that was it. But it stuck with me that he had said that. And it occurred to me that a lot of the reason that we have so many problems in this country that remain unaddressed really revolves around an unwillingness to acknowledge when certain things are just difficult. And I was thinking, why is it that why would a child rather watch Nickelodeon than do his homework? Why do people who are able to not exercise when they know it might extend their very lives? Why does our country borrow rather than pay? Why do people listen to the far left and the far right? It's because it's easier. It's easier than actually thinking through the problems this country faces. It's easier. It's that simple. Rush Limbaugh has 3 to 4 million people listening to him at any given time. MoveOn.org can raise millions of dollars instantly. Why is that? That's because the people who contribute to those shows, listeners and contributors to MoveOn.org, it's easy. It's easy to give in to what is being told to you. People don't do what's best. They do what will require the least effort. If you're looking for reasons to hate the right wing, there's no shortage of people feeding that. George Bush lied us into a war in Iraq. All right? That's an easy concept to embrace. And the merchants of malice on the left exploit that. They know you are just dying to believe it anyway, and they take you where you already want to go. That's easy. That's not hard. That is an easy job. Now, what if, as I happen to believe, Bush shaded things a little bit here and there because he completely and sincerely believed that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? I believe that. That's a little harder. That's a little more complicated. That's a little more forgivable. We don't want that. If you're out to destroy the Republican Party or to destroy the right wing or to demonize it, there's not much to work with there. But I happen to believe that that's the case. And there's an enormous amount of evidence that would support that. Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. He'd used them. People argue over whether the inspectors were kicked out or pulled out, but the fact remains there were inspectors there for a reason. There was a belief that he had those weapons. And I think George Bush believed that those weapons were there and that he would find them when we got there. And if it took a little selling to the country to get us there, that was his transgression. But I do not believe that he lied us into a war that he himself did not believe in. That he himself did not believe there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I believe he did believe that. But what are you going to do with that? If you're MoveOn.org, if you're Keith Olbermann, what do you do with that? Not much. You can't fit that one on a bumper sticker. It won't work. You'd have to take up the whole back of the car with that one. So they don't. They don't do that. You do the easier thing. You discard that and stick with Bush lied, people died. I've seen that bumper sticker. And we are willing to tolerate that because it's easier for us to do that. It requires less thinking. If you're already predisposed to disliking someone or something, you're less likely to scrutinize a negative claim about that person. And that's what American public discourse is about today. Neither side that we hear on cable or on talk radio, and I've said this before, I will continue to say it. The con here is that they're trying to get you to agree with them. They are trying to convince you that they are right. The extremists on either end have no interest in that. There's no money in it for them. They are not out to convince a single person that they are right. They are out to inflame the people who already share their views. They won't admit that. But that's all part of the con, not admitting it. Pro wrestlers will never admit that it's fake. And that's all part of the con. That's all part of the act. Denying that it's an act is part of the act. And that's how we end up with what we have now. We have people on both sides playing on what they know to be your predispositions. Because it's easier. It's easier than sorting through the actual facts on issues. A lot easier. When we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about this and the people that you know. You're listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number is 772-1290 if you want to call into the show. What I want to talk about right now is people that you know. That is the topic I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes on. And by that I mean this. You know conservatives, or people who have more conservative views. I've said before, there's no such thing in my mind as a true conservative or a true liberal. Everybody has some viewpoints that would be considered conservative, but not all their viewpoints are considered down the line conservative or liberal. And it is along those lines that I would ask you this. If you know somebody who you would describe as in general to be a conservative, and someone else, either in your family, anywhere, anybody you know, to hold liberal views, you know that those two people agree on some things. They just do. Lots of things. They agree on competence. That before a liberal agenda is enacted or a conservative agenda is enacted, it has to begin with competence. They agree on that. Doesn't matter what you're talking about implementing if the people involved can't carry it out. They agree that kids should be able to avail themselves of a good education. They just don't agree on how. But they agree on a good education, and that kids should have the opportunity for one. They agree on keeping America safe. They just don't agree on how to do it. But what is more important than agreeing on objectives? The rest of the stuff can be sorted out. It can be compromised out. If you don't agree on the objective, then you have real division. And you would think, from hearing people talk on cable, on radio, that Americans don't agree on the objectives. What's amazing to me is that nobody ever points out that we do. Of course we do. Newt Gingrich, undeniably a veteran of the legislative process, says that Americans and their elected representatives agree on 80% of the issues that are out there. And he says the Congress should pass those things first. I agree with him. Say what you want about Newt Gingrich. He consistently advocates constructive solutions. He worked with Hillary Clinton more than once. They have a mutual respect for one another. How can that be? Because they want to get things done. Now, come election season, everybody turns into a moron. That's just the way it goes. And during the elections, you'll see Newt Gingrich becoming just as partisan as any Democratic counterpart is being at the time. But, all in all, Newt Gingrich has devoted his career since he left the House to solutions. Creative solutions to things. I don't think anybody would argue that he's a well-known conservative. But he recognizes, as I do, that we agree on more than we disagree on. There's money to be made in exploiting the disagreements. And those are the people who I have a problem with. Those are the people who I believe want to divide this country, not help it. But it gets back to the theme of today's show. What is easier? Why don't you know more about what Newt Gingrich is proposing? Why do you know so much about what Bill O'Reilly, Rush Limbaugh, Keith Olbermann, MoveOn.org, why do you know their positions and not Newt Gingrich's positions? Because Gingrich's are kind of complicated, as are the problems he's addressing. That's no fun. That's not, that's hard. You got to think it through. You got to think it through with him. You got to listen to what he's saying and say, when he says, follow me through this, that's a little harder than liberals want to destroy America. All right, well, that's simple enough to understand. Conservatives have borrowed $10 trillion since Reagan. They lied us into a war. Now they complain about money. Well, that's simple enough to understand. Reagan's approach was to cut taxes and raise spending on defense. He said it would bring us a better economy. He was right. As I pointed out on this show, the fatal flaw at the end of it was that there was this implicit promise that when the economy generated more tax revenue, even with lower taxes, that the money that was borrowed to create those conditions would be paid back, and it was not. That was the flaw. In 2000, we had the money to pay back the deficit. There wasn't much discussion of that, or the debt, the national debt. He had a good theory, Reagan did. Unfortunately, the follow-through wasn't there. Obviously, it wasn't his decision. He was well out of office by then. But in 2000, had George Bush run on a platform of what Reagan started, I'm here to put the exclamation point on, by paying off the deficit. And we have now proven for all time that lowering taxes can create the climate where business thrives so that the money borrowed to create that climate for business can be repaid. Now, there would certainly have been an argument in there that Bill Clinton raised taxes in 93 and that was part of the reason, but he didn't raise them to levels that Reagan cut them from. But we don't, what I just went through there is really more than you hear on cable and on radio. I'm not saying it's better. I'm not saying it's perfectly, it should be perfectly persuasive to you, but at a minimum, it's an attempt to sort through the facts involved rather than characterize. And that's what the media does right now. They just simply characterize. When I called Rush Limbaugh's show, I got in between 12:45 and 1. He goes to the break at 1 o'clock. He comes out, and by then, he's had a few minutes to think about my call and goes on the attack. He comes out of his break saying that I'm a terrified liberal who's part of a campaign that's going to mobilize and derail his sit-down interview with Obama because I know that Obama would lose and there's no teleprompter and blah, blah, blah. My God. How much more nonsense can you pack into a minute or two of talk? characterizing is easier than getting to the merits of something. You just lump things in. That's the easiest of all. Rob Kilmer, liberal, the only liberal I know, who's willing to give George Bush the benefit of the doubt on the biggest issue of his presidency, the Iraq War, liberal, called in because I had heard him issue his challenge for a debate, and me and several million other liberals got together, devised a plan. I was able to get on his show and implement that plan by trying to change the terms of the debate. It's all garbage. It's nuts is what it is. It's nuts that people believe it. But they do, because it's easy to believe that. It's easier than thinking it through. Paul Harvey is up next. I will be back after him. You're listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. I guess it is not Paul Harvey up from 8:30 to 8:35. I don't know who that will be anymore. I'd assumed it would be Paul Harvey Jr., but that does not appear to be the case. I do want to get to one phone call. Lucas, you there?
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out something that I don't think a lot of people considered when the whole issue about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq came up.
Okay.
The person that Bush put in charge of finding the weapons of mass destruction was Donald Rumsfeld. Now, three guesses. Who was the person back in the 1980s who was brokering technology deals with Saddam? Donald Rumsfeld. Who would have the most motive not to find anything when there was stuff to be found? Donald Rumsfeld. That is the mistake I think a lot of this stuff was built on, because Rumsfeld had a motive not to find things. So when you find a factory that is brand spanking new, that has all the precursors for making nerve gas but hadn't been put into production yet, that had walls made out of pressed sands with the invisible to aerial photography, and that was guarded by a military garrison that was commanded by a general, we were told, oh, that's to make pesticides. Of course, Rumsfeld knows that 99% of the American public would be ignorant that the same chemicals that for the organic phosphates used in pesticides and the organic phosphates used in nerve gas are basically only a few atoms different from one another.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for the call. Thanks for calling in. My feeling on that is that I do believe Bush thought those weapons were there, and it is true, by the way. Lucas is absolutely right that Donald Rumsfeld. The only picture I've ever seen of an American official shaking hands with Saddam Hussein is Donald Rumsfeld back in the 80s when Iraq and Iran were at war, and we gave some assistance to Iraq regarding chemical weapons or biological weapons. I believe it was chemical weapons. Whether it was the actual weapons or intelligence or training, there's no question that Donald Rumsfeld met with Saddam Hussein for the purpose of assisting him in the war against Iran, who was our enemy at the time. But I don't know if I don't necessarily believe that there was an incentive not to find the weapons of mass destruction. I believe that they believed that they were there, and some solid evidence, including the fact that he'd already used them. In any event, we left off talking about Rush Limbaugh and the way that both sides basically exploit the tendency on the part of many people to just simply do what's easiest. And they make it easy for them. And the issue sort of becomes, what has to change? And the answer, in my mind, is that people have to insist, the public has to insist, it has to demonstrate its intolerance for this nonsense that passes for debate, that passes for political discussion on the most important issues this country has faced in 70 years. And to the extent that my show seeks to get past the noise from the right and the left and get to the facts, I don't think I'm doing anything unique. I think this country is ready for this. I don't think I'm the only one thinking this way. I think that Americans are truly worried about things that 5 years ago they didn't worry about. I think they see this nation at a turning point, and they want some answers. They want some information to form their own opinions, some real information. I think they're ready for the type of debates that I proposed to Rush Limbaugh. Now, I actually want to talk a little bit more about Rush Limbaugh, because there is a comment on my website right now that puts a very reasonable question to me. Essentially, it says, if your show is supposed to not be about the personalities on the right and the left, then why all this focus on Rush Limbaugh? And the answer is this. Rush Limbaugh is a symbol of the very thing this show tries to overcome. He keeps us from getting any closer to solutions. At times, particularly when he challenges the President of the United States to do what he calls a debate, and I have the opportunity to find out if he is willing to defend his positions in public, I'm going to take that opportunity. It isn't about Rush Limbaugh, the personality. It's about what he represents, which is these talking heads on the left and the right who inflame people on a daily or weekly basis and don't have the guts to go out there and defend their positions in public. They make you fearful. They make you angry. They make you anxious. They make you hateful. And then they disappear. That is what I think is wrong with the way this country handles its issues of national importance. And I do point it out. I understand that, it seems ironic. But I did that with Limbaugh to demonstrate that the premise of my show is valid, even though part of the premise of my show is not to focus on the personalities on the right or the left. My point is that those personalities want you to focus on them, and they want you to focus on the people they tell you to focus on, not the issues, but people. There are people who want to divide this country, and there are people who want to help it. Limbaugh wants to talk about Obama the man, and whether he needs a teleprompter and all this other nonsense. Everything but the issues. I just got a couple more things to get through. I got a caller, and I will get to you in just a minute or so, but I just want to get through the rest of this part. Think of how amazing it is. And remember what we talked about a little earlier with respect to people who hold liberal views and people who that hold conservative views, and how they agree on some things. There's just no question about that. Think about this. To my knowledge, Rush Limbaugh has never, ever advocated finding common ground with a liberal on anything. Now think about that. That's not even real life. That's not reality. When's the last time you heard Keith Olbermann say, other than in a sarcastic manner, Bill O'Reilly's right about this? I'll tell you what, I played on here a while back an exchange between Bill O'Reilly and Geraldo Rivera. That was an exchange. I mean, it was heated, But those were two people attempting to defend their positions. I'll give O'Reilly credit for that one. But when has Keith Olbermann, in fact, by the way, I may not be able to get to the call till after the break. When has Keith Olbermann ever told you that Bill O'Reilly was right about something? Something substantive? Never. And Rush Limbaugh, a 20-year career of not being able to find common ground on a single issue with a liberal. That's just not reality. That's not your life. That's not my life. I don't know anybody like that. I don't know anybody who holds views that I disagree with 100% of the time uniformly. I don't know anybody that I've known for 20 years that I could never agree with on a single thing. And he advocates that on a massive scale. He groups millions of people together as what he calls liberals, and then he tells them that tells you that their motivation is that they hate America and that they want to make everybody dependent on the government. All this built-in nonsense. Without ever having found a way to agree with one on a single liberal on anything? How can that be? That should show you what these people are trying to do versus what should be done. There are people out there trying to find solutions. Those efforts are frustrated by people who have a significant financial interest in sowing division. And I don't deny them their right to do it. They have every right to do that. But let's call it what it is. It's not real. It's pro wrestling. If it were real, if it were really about convincing this country that your ideas are right, you'd go somewhere where people could hear it. Not noon to 3. I've heard numbers. Limbaugh will say 20 million people listen to his show. I read something the other day that said it's impossible to determine it. They're able to determine that at any given time there's 3 to 4 million people listening to his show. And when he says 20 million people a week, I don't know if that's the same 4 million 5 times. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he's got 20 million people, separate, distinct people listening to his show. In a country of 360 million, he's got about 5%. There seems to be this confusion out there that because he has the biggest radio audience, that a majority of Americans agree with him. If by telling us that X amount of people listen to him, we're supposed to put some value on that number, then it's equally valid to put a value on the remainder. 340 million people a week don't listen to him. Most. The overwhelming majority. Over 90%. And if further the implication is that those who listen to him agree with him, then it would logically follow that those who do not listen to him don't. He doesn't speak for very many people when it comes to America as a whole. Unfortunately, it's America as a whole that suffers when the issues in this country are not reasonably and rationally debated. Okay, I have run a little long here. Gonna go take another quick break, and we'll come back and finish up. I've gotten a lot of feedback. I've got a video up now on YouTube with the exchange between Rush Limbaugh and I. It's at, if you go to YouTube and type in Limbaugh Exposed, you'll be able to see it. It's also available through my website. And most of the comments I've gotten have had nothing to do with the substance of the issues. And I think that that's telling. This is Rob Kilmer on You Defend It. Welcome back to You Defend It. I got Frank on the line. You there?
Good morning, Rob.
Morning.
You terrified liberal, you. Hey, I want to talk about the talk show wars, but first I'd like to just say that I think you're exactly right about George Bush and the Iraq War. If we didn't believe that, we would have to not believe the British, the French, the German, and the Russian Secret Service. So I think I would have done the same thing, but I would have gotten out of there a lot faster and put the onus on the Iraqis themselves to take care of themselves. I think the flack between the right and the left is basically obfuscation, in this case mainly by the Obama administration, but I think all administrations do it. I think they don't want to talk about the economy. They don't want to talk about mortgages, banks, and the important things going on right now. They don't want to talk about why they're not posting these bills on the internet for 5 days like they promised, and on and on and on. There was an article published, and right now I can't remember the lady's name. I think it was yesterday or day before, and she claims to be the acting secretary between these morning meetings. The leader being John Podesta, Paul Begala in there, Carvel, Emmanuel, Stephanopoulos, where they essentially, stick it to their enemies list. And I found it interesting that when Begala was asked about this, he didn't say, "Oh, there aren't any meetings like this." He said, "That's what I do." That was his answer.
Right.
I think also Jim Cramer, who calls himself a liberal Democrat and who supported Obama before the election, but who in the last few weeks is saying that Obama's economic policy essentially is incompetent. I mean, Jon Stewart is doing a number on him almost every night.
Jon Stewart destroyed him the other night.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, face to face.
Yeah, I saw that.
It was painful to watch.
And the lady who supposedly is this acting secretary published an article, and I can't remember where it was. It was one of these insider papers. Might have been Roll Call or something like that, something that I've never seen. But the important thing in all this, I think, is the return of the fairness doctrine. And I'm always looking out for you, and I think they're going to be coming after you eventually.
Well, I'm trying to push these debates, and I would enlist my local congressman's help. Normally, I mean, anybody would, but I don't think I can, and not. Maurice Hinchey is he is identified with the fairness doctrine, and I completely disagree with the fairness doctrine, and I'm afraid that any effort I made towards these debates that had his name associated with it would, and I don't mean any disrespect towards him, that just the fact that he so strongly supports the fairness doctrine would undermine, I think, my attempts to get these debates going.
Chucky Schumer supports the doctrine, too.
Well, and I can't get through to his office, so it doesn't really matter.
Boy, that really helps.
It's amazing. Well, I got to let you go. Okay. I did want to tell you, I did not ask Barack Obama to debate Rush Limbaugh. I had told you I would try. It's harder to get through to him than it is to Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah,
but I will keep.
I believe that.
I will keep at it. Thanks for calling.
Keep going. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, there has been a what Frank's talking about is that there's been reports that there are these meetings between basically Obama's administration, Emmanuel, and Democratic political operatives, that's traditional, that's fine, but to the extent that it involves George Stephanopoulos, and I don't know if that's been confirmed, that's out of bounds in my view. George Stephanopoulos has moderated presidential debates. That guy should not be participating in strategy calls with the Obama administration. And make no mistake, this whole thing with Rush Limbaugh and the fact that he was called out by Rahm Emanuel, that was a calculated thing. They polled on him. They believed that there was an opportunity there to associate or to brand the Republican Party with Rush Limbaugh as its head. And there's a lot of benefit to doing that if you're the type of politician that Barack Obama said he was not. There's huge advantages there. Right now, the congressional approval level is higher than it's been in quite some time. Although I find it interesting that when it was low, it was reported as the Democratic Congress. The approval for the Democratic Congress is at an all-time low. The stories right now about congressional approval rating, when it's up, they don't refer to the Democratic Congress being more popular, just Congress. I wonder why that is. But I don't think that it's an accident that Obama has chosen Limbaugh to make him the de facto head of the Republican Party. And the reason he's doing that is exactly consistent with what we were talking about here today. He knows that Limbaugh says things with a purpose of inciting the people who already agree with him. The language he uses, the things that he says, Rush Limbaugh, that is, are not designed to broaden the base. They are designed to infuriate the base. And if you believe that a lethargic base was the reason you didn't win the last election, then that's a good strategy. If you're Michael Steele, the, as of today, head of the Republican Party, you have a different purpose. You need to expand the base. You don't hear the White House talking about Michael Steele. You hear the White House talking about Barack Obama, and it's a ruthless political calculation. I am hoping, I don't know what's going to happen with Michael Steele, by the way. I don't know if you saw this, but in the last 3 or 4 days, it became public that in an interview he described abortion as an individual right. I don't know if he's long for that job as the head of the Republican Party. There may be that presents an opportunity, right? Whether he stays or whether somebody else comes in, there's an opportunity to get some debates going, I believe. I hope Michael Steele will, I've sent a letter to the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee. Put up your best, once a month, primetime, national television. If you're Michael Steele and you're looking to get out from under this cloud of your comments and whether or not you're the head of the Republican Party versus Rush Limbaugh, do something constructive. Get your party's message out there. If you're Tim Kaine, the head of the Democratic Party, don't believe your majority is going to last forever, because it's not. So we'll see what happens with that. But the reason that Limbaugh was chosen by the Obama administration is because when it comes to real numbers, he does not represent a large number of people. And the Obama administration wants a larger number of people who don't agree with Rush Limbaugh to identify him with the Republican Party, and therefore get a larger number of people to be at odds with the Republican Party. We'll see what happens. But in the end, I think the only way we're going to change things is if we stop taking the easiest route. People prey on us because they know we'll do what's easiest. It's easier to take a quick reaction to something, and that's why the language is chosen. That's why they talk in terms of anxiety and fear and mistrust. And it's easier to just simply form a quick opinion than to think things through. Nobody's asking you to think it through, and there's a reason for that. They don't want you to. They want you to form a quick opinion, take sides, and then they can move on to the next mind. And obviously this show is dedicated to something different, and we'll keep after it. Thank you for listening to You Defend It. Please visit my website, youdefendit.com, and we will see you next week.